This is August 12th, 2011. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, his show.
Their marital hierarchy. He is her godly husband. The husband is to be the head of the wife according to God. And then there was a question itself from Byron York, which seemed, as it left his lips, at best intensely uncomfortable, and at worst oddly prurient and unfair. York defended his question on Fox and Friends this morning.
This is a serious and legitimate question about something she has said, and believe me, if she progresses very far in the campaign process, she would have been asked this question. And I personally thought she handled it very well. She handled it in a much more human, it was like a very human moment for her.
Fox's Chris Wallace also defended the question, telling the radio show, in these days of women's liberation, which is a hilarious anachronism, for her to say, I didn't want to be a tax lawyer, but the Bible says to submit, and so I submitted, it is worthy of note. Joining me now is Erin Carmone, a reporter for Jezebel.com. Erin, so great to have you here on set.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So what was your reaction when you saw that?
You know, I don't often find myself in the company of Byron York and Chris Wallace, but I have to agree with them that it was a perfectly legitimate question.
Really?
Yes.
Why was it a perfectly legitimate question?
We're talking about somebody, first of all, she made the statement about being a submissive wife after she was in public life, holding office in 2006. We're talking about somebody who has her entire political career, up until very recently when she's opportunistically gotten interested in economics, has legislated and tried to legislate, been an activist driven by people's personal lives. Radicalized by Roe v. Wade, really interested in secular education, poisoning schools and teaching children homosexuality, avidly opposing homosexuality in politics and in personal life. And so I think it's perfectly fair game to say, to what extent does the way that you talk about your marriage and put it out in the public sphere inform your ideas for this country?
Okay, so the argument there is that it's the nature of what the ideological vision of politics she's pursued that opens her up, right?
And her priorities and what informs her politics and the way that she's made her marriage an example for the way people should be living their lives.
But there's also part of me that feels, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, it feels a little John Kennedy in 1960 in the Catholic Church, right? Where the question was, you belong to this faith that says you have to listen to the authority of the Pope, and yet you want to run the United States of America, and aren't you just going to do what the Pope says? And I think we all now recognize that as there's something really odious about that kind of conception.
Right.
What's the distinction?
Michele Bachmann totally embraces evangelical Christianity, unless she's talking to some other general audience. It's a big part of her life. It really informs her policies, and she put it on the table. I mean, even Sarah Palin did not, when she was governor of Alaska, she did not really create as a priority social issues. Michele Bachmann, from beginning to end in her career as legislator, up until very recently, this was really something that was very important to her, and she continued to hold up her marriage as a model for all marriages.
Do you think the actual substance of the question, I mean, aside from its fairness, do you think it's actually like a legitimate concern? I mean, do you think that...
No. I don't think it's I mean, here's why. I mean, I think Michele Bachmann very wisely plays to her audience. At the time that she was at the Living Word Christian Center, she was talking to women and men who needed to see themselves in her. And, I think that this is actually... Let's think about her answer. What she said in her answer was, submission equals respect. All day today, people were making fun of this. That's crazy. Here's the dictionary definition of what
we have two different words, in fact.
Right. Yeah. One of them is mutual, one of them is one-sided. But in fact, if you look at all into sort of gender roles in evangelical communities, this is a totally commonplace paradox, right? You have people who say that the husband is the head of household and the woman's place is the home, but for all sorts of reasons, they have lives that for economic reasons or for personal reasons, women end up having lives outside the home, and their marriages are more equal than what is laid down in the law.
The final question is about this sort of scapegoating. That it always does feel like it's hard to tease this stuff apart, because at a certain level, like, there is something uniquely infuriating about Sarah Palin and Michele Bachmann, and yet at the same time there does feel like there's always this kind of underlay of something insidious gender-wise in the way that people pounce. Do you think there was anything like that in that question last night, or do you think that was sort of above board? Was there sort of two things operating?
I mean, look, Michele Bachmann's camp was very happy that the question was asked, right? They said on record that they felt that it was an opportunity. All of those, it sounded like men booing when the question was asked. They felt that she had been victimized. I mean, in fact, this is not a very feminist thing to say, don't attack the woman, don't ask her a legitimate question. I would rather, did they ask about Newt Gingrich's marriages? Not to my knowledge. But I think if this is going to be a part of your politics, it is completely fair to ask, and we don't need to be protecting female candidates in a way that would be different from how we would treat male candidates.
Doreen Carmone, you've convinced me. From Jezebel.com. Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, the downgrade of U.S. debt by Standard & Poor's helped make the world economy look like a roller coaster this week. And no matter what you think of Standard &